Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
First one is titled, Car Dealer Shenanigans. My wife is a doc. She tired of the frequent service visits her Merc required and visited an Infiniti store. She was told that she could not drive a Q45 unless I was present. She called me at work, not far from the dealer. Salesman confirmed what she said, we must both be present for the test drive. Idiots. The landscaping crew was doing their thing outside my office, so I decided to employ them in my subterfuge. I changed into my workout clothes, rolled around in the grass and paid Hector $100 to drive his rusted-out, extended cab pickup and long trailer loaded with mowers, me and his crew, to the dealership. The dealer was located downtown, on a postage-stamped lot, and there was no place to park the truck and trailer without completely belixiing their only street entrance and parking lot entry. They, move your truck. Me, you told me I had to be here for the test drive. They, who are you? Me, her husband. You called me away from mowing your POS truck is blocking everything. Correct. Me, are you going to let the nice lady doctor do a test drive? They folded quickly. She bought the Q45 from a different Infiniti dealer. Next one is titled, You Don't Want Me to Waste Time by Following Procedures? Okay. I was watching r/today and one of the stories on his video reminded me of this. Like the story in his video, I worked at, for legal reasons let's call it Walmart myself. And I ducking hated the spill rule. Here's the thing, if you don't follow spill procedure, you get bitched out. If you do, you get bitched out for wasting time. For context, for those that have the absolute blessing of never working the hell that is Walmart, procedure states you have to wait by the spill until another associate comes by. If it's a bad spill, you're supposed to help clean up the spill. I've got millions of Walmart horror stories, and this is one of many. We had a customer knock about 3 glasses off the shelf, breaking them. Per procedure, I waited by the spill. The next 10 minutes, Jedi to backroom, over and over and over and over on the intercom. It must have been announced about 4 times in under 5 minutes. For context, I pulled pallets of freight from the backroom to the sales floor, so it wasn't life-threatening, I knew. Finally another associate sees me, gets a broom, and we clean up the spill. As soon as I get to the back room, my supervisor bitched me out saying, you are needed here, not out there. You leave that to the sales team. The next day when I came in, I was written up for wasting time. When I explained what had happened, I was again told, well, next time you should just leave it. You see where this is going, right? That's sweet MC. About a week later we had a new guy working chem. Now, with backroom, we have to pull everything off trucks and stack it on pallets. Then pull those to the floor. He starts to pull the most unstable pallet I've ever seen. Thing was leaning before he left. He pulls it to the sales floor and gets all the way to chem with me behind him. When it goes, boxes on boxes fall and laundry detergent and fabric softener go everywhere. We're talking at least 7 bottles worth, all over the floor and quickly into the women's apparel section. I pull my pallet around and keep walking. As I'm coming back, I see him standing there. Looking back, I feel bad for doing this, but at that moment I didn't give a single solitary duck. I said, you'll need some speedy dry, asked Dick, our supervisor, who bitched me out, fake name, for some, and walked away. When management asked why I didn't help, I straight up told them, you told me not to worry about spills. That I should leave it for others, and you wrote me up. I'm just following your instructions. I didn't get written up, and never got bitched at for following procedures again. Next one is titled, Want Me to Pay for the Internet? Sure thing. This happened a few years ago when I still lived with my parents and paid keep. I work in IT and love gaming and all things tech, so I'm a very heavy user of the internet. Where I live, a single company owns all of the copper cables for the internet, and they charge a fortune for a terrible service with no incentive to make it any better. We were on their 40 Mbps package but frequently got around 8 Mbps speeds, with latency often going into triple figures. Not ideal for gaming or streaming. A new ISP, Internet Service Provider, relocated here and started offering better speeds and undercutting the existing shitty ISP. They retaliated by offering a new 80 MB/s package, while the new ISP could only provide 40, and it was surprisingly £5 cheaper than their existing 40 MB/s package we were on. Obviously this is a no-brainer to switch to, as it's not only cheaper, but also faster. I went to my parents and asked if we could upgrade our internet package, but they aren't heavy users and were fed up of my complaining, and told me that if I wanted it, I had to pay the difference for it. My keep was being paid directly into their bank on a standing order, so I simply took this from the nice round figure of 300 and dropped it down to 295. Several months went by without anybody saying anything, so I figured they didn't care. Eventually my dad brought it up because he's very tight when it comes to spending money, and I said word for word what they had told me and that they didn't give me time to explain. Not particularly malicious, and they were a bit annoyed at first but saw the funny side later that evening. I put the keep back to 300 and bought a takeout that week to make up for loss of earnings. Next one is titled, They Requested More DVDs? okay. Okay, so another tale from the pawn shop. Backstory. When I was working as a pawnbroker at the most profitable store in my company, we took in a lot of DVDs. Standard pay was 50 cents a DVD, and people would come with boxes, tubs, bags, and that one time an entire bed of a pickup truck. Stacked. So, needless to say, we had a lot of DVDs out for sale and in the back. The reason we paid that low for them was that we didn't discriminate based on popularity or title. It was 50 cents if it was the rarest movie. The rarest movie I've ever heard of was The History of Beavis and Butthead, but that's a story for another time, or the most common DVD. We also didn't catalog our DVDs, which made searching for them a waste of time. Unless you're me. See, I really loved organizing the DVDs, not because I'm organized. Every time I was helping our customers out on the pawn line, I was also answering the phones, and my co-workers were also helping the customers. But they didn't like answering the phones. So, I often volunteered to go clean the messy, unorganized and dusty DVD area and stop having to answer the phones for a while. And I became very familiar with our inventory. Story. Well, my boss, who was a badass, got passed for a promotion to district and was very angry about it. But that didn't stop him for doing a kick-a-hole job. So, badass boss, who we will call Jim, gets a call from corporate saying the new store we just opened needed some DVD inventory and could we send over 200 or so. Jim agrees after asking if we have that many available in back stock. We do, and it won't even put a dent in our collection. At the time our inventory said we had roughly 6,000 DVDs. So, Jim has me go up and pick a random 200 for transfer. I do, because I don't want my fellow brokers screwing up my system. They didn't know how to alphabetize for crap. So, I get the 200 and pack them up in a box, wrap the box in cling wrap for security, and they are taken to the new store within an hour. 2 days later Jim gets a call for another 200. I go do my thing and same as yesterday, taken to the new store. 2 more days pass, and another call comes in. Then, it happens a 4th time and Jim is annoyed. We've sent them 800 DVDs and we aren't the only store to do so. At the time, our pawn store had 22-ish locations. I'm also annoyed, because I'm tired of having to box up DVDs every other day. It was getting old. So, 2 more days passes and we get our 5th request, but this time, there's an extra bit to the request. Could you include duplicates, please? Some of the DVDs are missing their discs and it's pretty annoying. Jim called me in to read that. See, we didn't check every case for discs when we took them in because I don't have time to go over every case when people are bringing in literal pickup beds worth of DVDs. So, when we saw that, we met eyes and grinned. Time for some malicious compliance. What I didn't mention was that of the 6,000 DVDs we had, there was a good solid 1,000 of them that were only 2 titles, Austin Powers Goldmember and The Matrix Reloaded. So, I went up to the DVD shelves and packed up only the Matrix DVDs into a box, wrapped it and sent it on its way. Jim got a call from the new store's manager to thank him, because he thought it was hilarious. But, for real Jim, your brokers are slacking on DVD intake. They need to keep a better eye on DVDs, or your guys' numbers will slip. We were the flagship store, and all of our brokers were in the top 10. Can I get a real box of DVDs now? I still need duplicates. Jim, with the fakest nicest voice, goes, "Sure, man, we will send you some more DVDs." He turned to me after he hung up and said the words I want on my gravestone: "Prepare the gold members." I boxed up every single Austin Powers Gold member DVD we had in our store into 200 group boxes, and we sent all of the boxes to their store. The store never asked us for DVDs again. Next one is titled, "My Dad's Mic Drop Moment." Okay, as the title says, this was not my own malicious compliance, but my dad's. I was the subject of it, however, and had a front row seat through the whole thing. Now for the background to understand what happened. This happened almost 30 years ago, but this story is to this day my favorite story about my dad. I was 13 at the time and in the 8th grade. And this was a Thursday on the way to lunch. Both are important later. I had ended up in a fight at school because I did something stupid without realizing it until afterwards. If people want, I can give details later, but they aren't really needed to the malicious compliance. All that needs to be known is I did not throw the first punch and tried to walk away from the fight early on. This got me jumped from behind, and it was only because of a gym teacher that I wasn't more badly hurt. After the fight was broken up, both the other kid and I had to write down our versions of what happened, as apparently so did many witnesses, both teachers and students. A nurse had looked me over, and all I had was some bruises. Then came the waiting game. Obviously, with a fight, our parents were called. In my case, my dad came. At the time, this worried me a little because normally my mum took care of things if the school called. Her job was much more flexible time-wise, so it just worked out better that way. Well, that day my dad came instead. I don't remember why. He got there before the other kids' parents, so we were taken into the principal's office. We both sat down, and I'm terrified. We all know that look of when a parent looks civil but is just waiting to go nuclear. That was the look on my dad's face when he walked in. I was convinced I was dead kid walking. I don't dare say a word. Convinced that will just set my dad off sooner. So I sit there as the principal runs my dad through a thorough and more accurate retelling of what happened than I was expecting. While this is going on, my dad is miraculously, at least from my point of view, coming down. I was a second family for my parents. With much older siblings. My dad felt, and still does, that there are times to fight and times to walk away. And as the principal is talking, he apparently realized I had behaved the way he wanted me to in those situations. It was to the point that when the principal finished her retelling of what happened and explained that I hadn't lied to try and make myself look better, and that my story matched up with all witness statements and the other boys too. My dad just looked at me and nodded. I was floored. I had no idea what was going to happen next, but if Dad wasn't mad anymore, I could roll with the rest. Sorry for the long setup. Here's the what does compliance. It was clear on my dad's face now that he thought the school was just covering their bases, and he seemed more than willing to let them. That was until the principal stated that by school police I was to be sent home for the rest of the day, and receive a 1-day suspension for the next day, Friday. This enraged my dad. She had flat out stated I had both acted in self-defense and tried to end the fight, so Dad demanded to know why I was being punished with a suspension, and what was going to happen to the other kid. She explained that it was simply school policy and her hands were tied. My dad would tell me later that he thought she was full of it. As for the other boy, he was to be given 10-day suspension. Now my dad didn't argue, and I was just trying to stay out of the way and watch. So I was surprised when my dad turned to me and said, "So what you want on your pizza?" Pizza was and will always be my favorite food. I floored with no idea what to say. Apparently this was clear on my face because my dad continued, "If they're going to give you a 3-day weekend, you might as well have a pizza and some movies to enjoy." Even as I began to smile so big my face hurt, the principal said, "What? I'm sorry, what did you say?" My dad just as quickly replied very matter-of-factly, "Well, from what you've told me, my son did nothing wrong and handled the situation as well as could be expected. You may be bound by school policy and have to suspend him, but since he behaved just as his mother and I raised him to, I see no reason to his suspicion to be a punishment. I in fact want to encourage what I believe is appropriate behavior in my son. Now if you'll excuse me, since he is suspended and hasn't eaten lunch, I'm going to feed my son." With that he stood up and walked out the door, with me right behind him. I didn't even look back. Fallout. My dad did get me a pizza for lunch and we stopped off at a movie place to rent a few movies and video games for me. He took me and my bounty home and snagged a couple of slices for himself while he talked to my mum on the phone. She agreed with him completely, and so I never got in any real trouble for the fight at him. As for the other kid, I don't know much about what happened to him. We didn't have any classes together until our junior year 11th grade, for anyone who doesn't know the term. First day of that year he pulled me aside and apologized to me. He also told me, although he kept it vague and I didn't push, that the fight had led to things improving in his home life. It was nice to know that something good had come out of it, even if to this day I don't know the details. I know it isn't a major FU to anyone like some acts of malicious compliance, but to me at the time it was epic, and I still find it funny today. Edit. There have been some messages and posts seeming to think I was in this fight because of bullying or I was targeted for some reason. This couldn't be farther from the truth. I respect what people in those situations have had to overcome too much to let people think it was the same for me. I'll keep this as short as possible. I was heading to lunch after an English test, and thinking more about food than anything else. Moving more on autopilot than conscious decision-making, I cut between two guys that had apparently squared off to fight. There was already a crowd forming, making going around hard. Not thinking it through clearly, I queued between as I said before. This hacked off both of them. The one I ended up fight spun me around asking what I thought I was doing. He threw the first punch, I countered, the repeated once, then we were just standing there staring at each other, the guy he originally had a problem with gone by this point. At this point I realized the fight was pointless. I gained nothing from this fight, so I said this is ducking worthless and turned to leave. Got as far as the doors to the cafeteria when the other guy jumped me from behind. While I appreciate the show of support, it was misplaced in this case. There was no bullying, just me not paying attention to my surroundings. Next one is titled, Make Us Cut Our Hair? Time to Get Creative. This was while I was serving my drafted army duty, 1-year conscription in my country. My hair was a bit long before entering, and I had to cut it so it didn't reach or cover my ears or the top of the shirt at the back of my neck. At first, I didn't mind much, and neither did my fellow draftees. After basic training, however, things started to change. I got some officers who were on power trips and were very meticulous about all the most-minute rules. It didn't take long before we got tired of it. At one inspection, some of my fellow draftees were told their hair had grown too long, and they needed a haircut before the platoon would be given weekend leave. A soldier must always look tidy and spotless, especially when mingling with civilians, they said. At almost every weekend we had leave, they managed to find something that needed improving before they let us go. We were always the last platoon to leave camp, and we found we had reached and crossed a line, and something had to be done. A fellow draftee had a buzz cutter, a small machine that could cut our hair really short. He charged us a small amount to cut our hair if we wanted, but few had used his services until now. So, most of us had a regular but short, civilian haircut. Almost none had gone for the army look or buzz cut. We read up on the regulations and found that the only relevant points were that hair should not cover even the top of our ears nor touch the shirt in the back of our necks. We also couldn't use bright colors in our hair. Cue malicious compliance. Almost everybody in our platoon decided to join in on the fun, and we got creative. There were mohawks aplenty, not all of them symmetrical or straight, weird patterns were cut, sporadic long and short hair all over our heads. One even made sure to shave a big bald spot in the back, leaving only 2 dots and a horizontal line of hair at the back of his head. The officers were impatient as we took our time getting this done, but they had said something to the likes of, "Don't show yourselves here until your hair complies with the regulations." So, we let them simmer a bit. We eventually formed up on the parade ground with our berets on, mostly covering our creativity. A few smirks and snickers could be felt among us as we waited for the command to bare our heads for inspection. I will never forget the look on my officers' faces when they realized what we had done, and it dawned on them that we were all compliant with the regulations. About half of us kept it up for the rest of our service, trying out various patterns and looks every month or so. It was always a pleasure to see the regret in the eyes of our officers whenever we were indoors, and regulations had us go bareheaded without our berets. particularly after getting a new cut showing of our new patterns and unbridled creativity. It was like constantly rubbing our malicious compliance in their faces. When we finally had finished our year of service, one of the officers complimented us on our creativity and perseverance. Last one is titled, Any Military MC Stories? My fairly bland, mostly pulling duty like mowing grass where the order was, don't have me inspect it unless it's perfect. I learned early on that perfect meant, when the NCOIC, non-commissioned officer in charge, is getting off duty. Mowing took an hour or so, then I'd disappear until about 4:45 or so. Lo and behold, it looked great. My favorite happened to a friend of mine. He was new to the battalion, straight out of basic. His sergeant sent him on a chase for a box of grid squares. This is like a left-handed screwdriver or a skyhook. Anyway, he is sent around post for a couple hours and is told not to come back till he finds it. He eventually does. It is a map cut up into 1,000 pieces. He is then told to put it together. For a week he pieces that map back together, while watching TV the whole time. The joke his sergeant thought was mean ended up being 5 days of vegging out watching the tube and napping. Tax dollars at work. Thanks for listening.